right. Hello, hello. If you guys can hear me, make sure to let me know in the chat. Been having trouble with my microphone. Let's check. There we go. All right, I am just going to assume that it's working. All right.
I'm gonna check.
Yeah, that would be great.
In YouTube?
Yes. Thank you, Christian. All right, so I'm working on this. I'm doing a series of beautiful oil painting. I love her braid. Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much. Still working on the braid, still working on the face, but it's coming together and I'm really enjoying this process. Please let me know if you can hear my voice. I've been having issues with the microphone. And greetings from New York. Awesome. I love New York. I'm jealous that you have such easy access to the Met and other museums. So yeah, as I paint this, I'd love if you guys have any questions about process or what colors I'm using, whatever you guys want. I'm happy to answer for the next hour. So ideally it's related to what I'm working on, but if you have any questions, I'm open. I've got these cameras set up in the studio, and I'm like, hey, you know what? Why the heck am I not using these more often? And I can switch between my palette and my canvas, so that'll be nice. I'm going to be using this mixture of stand oil, liquid, and a little bit of Gamsol to mix into my paint. That's going to help the paint kind of level out as well as dry quicker. I used it yesterday, so all of the paint on the surface is nice and dry and awesome. My goodness. Yeah, I am doing oil, and hi from England, Rob. Glad you're here. Nice to meet you. All right, new sub. Thanks for subscribing. All right, so I'm gonna start by laying down what my friend Diego calls a couch. I'm not exactly sure why he calls it that, but I'm laying down some wet paint to paint into on this cheek. So all of this should be pretty dry. I was working on it yesterday. But nice and thin. So yeah, if you guys have any questions about process or whatever, I am happy to help you out. Let's see if I can get better access to the chat. Even the palette looks like a work of art. Yeah, my palette is such a mess. So I'm glad you're seeing a work of art and not really the mess that it actually is. All right, so I did want to work on this ear. Soften some of these edges. It looks a little crunchy and I want it to be smooth. So, Now, this isn't going to be the most exciting stream in that the quantity of paint that I'm laying down is going to be very, very minimal. But should still be interesting. I am working from a photo. I did a photo session with this lovely family, and I am just thrilled with how these photographs turned out. I did a lot of editing and composing using Procreate, and I'm just dying to paint all of these. And I'm sorry if the audio isn't great. The distance from the microphone to my face is kind of extreme, so I turned up the sensitivity. So hopefully my studio mates are not gonna make too much noise shuffling around. You guys should definitely go check out their work. My friend immediately next to me is Christian Mora, so you can look him up on Instagram and all the social medias. And then behind me is the legendary artist Diego Glazer. And then someone who isn't here today is Ben Walling. I bet he'll be showing up soon. He'll crash the party. There's something, what does that say? Something about a buttery oil painting with lots of texture. Something beautiful about. Thank you. Yeah, there is something about that. There's a fine line for me, though. I really don't like when oil paint looks like frosting. I get a gag reflex. It really disturbs me. To each their own, but I hope that my paintings never look like frosting. Do you agree, Christian?
I agree.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
Yep.
I also want to move this eyebrow a little bit. Oh, I want to make sure you guys can see the palette too. Yeah, if you want to learn more about texture and how to build that up, I've been coming out with weekly videos on my Patreon where I discuss breaking things down into component parts, where I'm starting a painting in a grisaille or a painting in black and white and working on values and texture first, and then after that I'm glazing and painting semi-transparently on top. So if you'd like to check that out, you can go to my Patreon. And there you can ask personal questions about the painting process, and I'm much more likely to be able to get back to you in a much faster. And then you can also see other people's questions and the answers to those. Hello, Tanner. Hello, T-Chat. Is that my chat now? Hello, sir. Glad you're here. Quick tip about eyebrows. You don't want them to be really sharp edges. Otherwise, it's going to look pretty cartoony. They're going to have nice, soft transitions. I also want to open this eye up a little bit more. So you guys can see the quantity of paint that I'm using. It's hardly anything. It's very, very thin. At a previous stage, I'd be painting significantly thicker, especially to build up the texture in the face. And when drawing and painting a portrait, I have a rule where when you're first starting, you want it to look human, right? And then after that, you want it to look like that type of person or something similar to them. And then after that, you want to make it look like that person. So I view likeness as the carrot on the end of the stick that's driving me. So I can make it look similar to them, but it takes a while to make it look exactly like them. So you should be patient with yourself. Of course, you guys are viewing this at an angle, or a slight angle. I tried to get it as close to the front of my canvas as possible. So there is going to be a slight distortion. So tell me in the chat, what artists have you guys been looking into, and who do you find to be interesting nowadays? Lately, I've been looking at the contemporary artist Ruth Fitton. If you don't know her work, go check it out. It's crazy. Fabulous stuff. I've also been listening to a podcast called the Undraped Artist Podcast. If you haven't discovered it yet, it's about to blow up. I mean, it's blowing up right now. It's by the artist Jeff Hine. He's interviewing a lot of contemporary artists, and I'd highly recommend that you go check his channel on YouTube and his podcast out. So good. And I hope to see you guys at the Portrait Society Conference in Georgia, in Atlanta, Georgia. Always looking forward to that event every year. I wasn't able to go last year because I was in Rome with Daniel Sprick and my buddies here. But we're definitely going to make it this year. Oh, thanks, Mike. That's really nice. Yeah, it's pretty incredible how that simple act of just doing the thumbs up or, liking the video, how that impacts the video for the long run. After this, I've got a private lesson over Google Meets. I do that every, I live in Colorado, so it's Mountain Standard Time. So 1 to 4 o'clock Mountain Standard Time I do a Zoom lesson. If you guys are ever interested in joining that, I have a few spots available, so let me know. We work on everything from portrait drawing to portrait painting, still life drawing, master copies, pretty much everything. What I like to do for my students is create an individualized curriculum for them and make it so they can reach their personal artistic goals. All right, I'll stop with that. Let me talk more about this. Inside the mouth, I'm not sure if the camera's going to be able to pick this up, but what I'm doing is I'm grabbing alizarin crimson and I'm trying to make sure that inside the mouth and in the nose and in the ear, everything is really, really warm. That is one major tip that I have for everyone who is painting and drawing, or painting portraits, is to warm up every single dark accent. Anytime you go dark, doesn't have to be purple, but definitely warm things up. Inside the nose, you can get away with almost pure cadmium red. That's, cad red is more of a middle value, but keeping things nice and warm is a really good idea. That's going to help all flesh feel more like flesh. Another tip I have for you guys, so I'm painting this portrait horizontally. You can see that the entire scene is actually not going this direction, right? So I've turned it up on its angle because I find it significantly easier to gauge whether the portrait is accurate or not just based on being on this axis, turned up on its side. Why make it harder for yourself? Underneath this cheek, I'm adding that alizarin glaze. And just so you know, I've been working maybe 15 hours on this piece. There's been a lot of experimentation, a lot of scraping, a lot of trying things over and over again. And I think it's wise to be as patient as you possibly can with realism. It doesn't necessarily mean you're getting tighter all the time making things. My goal is to not make this photographic by any means. I want it to still look like paint. But in order to make the right decision, sometimes it takes a few tries. A lot has changed since the last time that I made a video. I have a completely different studio now. I'm now sharing it with the four guys here: Christian Mora, Diego Glazer, Ben Walling, and we're very, very fortunate. The incredible artist Kwang Ho has allowed us to use his studio while he's in Pennsylvania. And it's a spectacular space. And it's amazing to be able to work alongside these guys because we're just constantly pushing each other and learning from each other and growing our friendships. This brush that I'm using is a Rosemary & Co. Michael Klein round. I got it in the Alex Venezia brush set. Some students of mine were so sweet. They ordered a few brush sets and hooked me up with one of these. And it's the brush set that I recommended because I really do love all the brushes in there. But of course, it isn't the brush that makes the painting. Obviously. So right now I'm just working on these tiny, tiny value shifts, darkening things ever so slightly. Shifting hues, a little bit warmer, a little bit cooler. Generally, as you're moving from the light shape into the shadow, things get a little green, and then they might get a little warmer. Common mistake that I see in my students is making the lips a little bit too sharp. You see that local color shift, and you assume that it means it needs a sharp line. And mine's pretty sharp right now. I'm actually going to fix that. You want it to feel like a rolling cylinder going from the light into the dark. So with very little paint, I'm going to paint semi-transparently over this transition, making it just slightly smoother so the form rolls. And the corners of the lips should be or corners of the mouth should be very, very soft. Again, if you have any questions, please ask in the chat. Happy to answer.
Salute.
Bless you. Switch back to the palette so you guys can see. I've got a series of pre-mixtures here. My general light flesh tone, my middle flesh tone, my darker flesh tone. And this keeps me within the correct value range, and then I can adjust with the colors out here. So if it needs to be more yellow, maybe I'll add ochre, Indian yellow, something like that. I've got Naples yellow, and lately I've been tubing a lot of my paint. where I'll create these premixtures just to start me out. And you know, they're just general flesh tones. I've got a list of all the colors that are in them. This one has cad yellow, vermilion, burnt sienna, titanium white, and then I'm premixing liquid and stand oil into them. And by doing so, liquid's going to make it dry a little bit faster. Stand oil is going to make it more of the viscosity of honey, right? So stand oil usually makes things dry slower, so they kind of work together, so the paint dries at a good even rate. This was on my palette yesterday, and it's still is wet. And what's cool about using stand oil is if I like flick this, you can create little ridges in the paint, and that's how I'm creating the texture in the flesh. Okay, noticing that I need to, let's see, make the white of my eye a little bit taller. And although it's called the white of the eye, absolutely not, it's not white. So I'm going to see on the palette in the upper right hand corner, I'm adding a little bit of black and brown into this white, and even a little bit of the red from the flesh tone. And I'm going to paint this pretty thin, and I'm going to push the upper right hand side by the iris up. I'm always taking a step back and checking my work from afar. I find that you are much more objective at a distance. You're able to see the big picture. And with this tiny shape, I am using this tiny little brush. I did not paint the whole thing using this brush. When you first start out, it's a good idea to use the largest brush for the job. Helps with efficiency and working on, you know, the larger shapes. Okay, I moved that up a little bit, but now I don't like the edge. So I'm gonna grab some of that dark mixture, the ivory black and raw umber, and I'm gonna paint into the white, softening it ever so slightly. Oil paint is best used wet into wet. I can also make the iris darker. On the portrait, the darkest thing usually is going to be the pupil. Although, as I say that, there are so many cases where it can be different, so maybe that shouldn't be a rule. Okay, checking back at my reference. What needs to change? Okay, I'm missing a little highlight on the nose. So I'm gonna grab some of this light Naples yellow mixture. It's not Naples yellow, I'm calling it Naples yellow. It's actually one of my pre-mixtures. The one I listed before, the cad yellow, burnt sienna, vermilion, but it's a yellow leaning pre-mixture. Leave that there. Spread it out a bit. I always have a paper towel in one hand, and I'm wiping the brush, and I'm very well aware with how much paint is actually on my brush. One of the coolest things about oil paint is that you can paint transparently or semi-transparently. You can see through to each of the layers. It's like painting each layer of skin. It's really fun. Okay, you know what really needs work is these little beads in the background. And they kind of have a green tinge to them. So I've got raw umber. Maybe could squirt out some transparent yellow oxide. This is by Rembrandt. I'm just gonna put that there. Boop. So ivory black should be viewed as a blue. So when you mix black and yellow, you're gonna get green. So here's my ivory black. Put a little bit there. Indian yellow. This is going to create a transparent mixture, and it's leaning green. It's not a saturated green like Viridian or anything like that. Let's see, this is kind of drying up. There we go. So I'm going to take this white, mix it in there. That creates this like dirty green, which is exactly what I'm going for. Perfect. So I'm gonna go to each one of these little guys and add in that halftone. So it'll be the darker area on the left side. Okay, I'm gonna grab a bigger brush. I have all my brushes laying in safflower oil, so I need to make sure that I clean those off. They're sitting in a paint tray that is pretty darn cool. It's a new product being in development by Robin Cole. Squirt out more burnt sienna. This brush is nice. It's a Rosemary & Co. Comer Series 2230, and you can see it's got like these splayed hairs. I'm sure you could make one by just cutting up a brush, but it's nice when painting hairs. Very, very light. I can paint the dark accents in between hairs. There we go. I like that one. I can also take the back of my brush, scratching in, removing some of that dark, revealing another strand of hair on top, and it's layer by layer. It's pretty interesting working around the camera. Right now you guys are in front of me. I usually have the camera positioned behind me, but this is kind of working. Nice. I like that. Like that a lot. Let's see. Maybe we'll add it into this braid a little bit. Right now, my private students and I are painting a bird's nest, and we're using brushes like this. We're talking about how to simplify such a chaotic subject. It's not a matter of painting every single branch or every single hair in here. Oh man, this is working. I love it. Also, not being afraid to experiment, because you can always fix it with oil. I've had so many people assume or say that watercolor and other mediums are more forgiving, but I don't know. Oil paint is very forgiving. I know firsthand because I make a heck of a lot of mistakes. But not as many as Christian. Gotcha. This value is not all the way down to black. It's more like as dark as raw umber is. You want to reserve your darkest darks to the very end. I can use this same effect in the chair if there's like cracks in the wood or dark accents. I like to paint in the wood grain that way. Kind of see it here. There we go, I like that. That's pretty cool. That's a little dark right there, but that's okay. We'll go in this direction.
Why is rowing with hydro?
Wow, I'm so sorry. This is risky, but I might want to paint in the eyelashes using this. High risk, high reward. Okay, I like the ones on the left more than these. Might be a little much. worked over there. There we go. That. Maybe even work on his hair a little bit. These brush strokes are like pathways, like cross contours. If I were an ant crawling across the surface, what direction would I be going? Or what direction is the hair growing? Let's see, I don't like this eyelash, so I can scratch it away. Because the surface underneath is dry. And just by spreading out the material, it's like you're erasing it. Okay. Let's go back to the ear. Softening all these transitions. Again, if you have any questions, please, you can ask them in the chat. Happy to answer anything about this painting or whatever. Yeah, that's a great question. So you said you're about 15 hours into this. Over how many sessions have you specifically allowed time for the layers to dry? Yeah, so I like to use a fast drying medium called Liquin. And by using Liquin every single day that I come into the studio, it's going to be pretty much dry from the day before. And that allows me to, continue working on it every day, and it's dry every single day when I come in the studio. Now, that's just a rough estimate, so I will continue working on things even if they're a little bit wet, but I would say that it's very rare for it to be still wet the following day. And I wouldn't say that you need to wait a certain amount of time before you continue painting on top of it, because there's different advantages to painting wet into wet and painting wet into slightly tacky paint. When it's slightly tacky, you can get different textural effects if you move the paint around with different tools like the back of your brush or palette knife or even a knife. One example where actually waiting for the paint to be dry is important is in areas like this where I was building up a lot of texture in the face. I actually waited over a week, even while using Liquin and Stand Oil. I let this part of the face dry completely so that I could come back with a knife and scrape it off, just like kind of like sandpaper but in a smaller area, and I just scratched the high points or the ridges off. I did that all over the place, a little bit on this thumb. You can actually see, let's see. Oh, you guys can't really see up by the thumb, but if I raise this up slightly, boop, and zoom in, let me change the exposure slightly so it's not so blown out. So you can see that there are like ridges in the shirt. Well, I decided that the thumb needed to expand outward, and one of the ridges of the shirt went through the thumb. So I had to wait for that paint to dry underneath so that I could take a knife and then scrape away that ridge and then paint on top. So to go back to your question, you don't need to wait for the paint to dry for you to continue working on it. Let me know if that answered your question or if you have any follow-ups. So even though the paint is dry underneath this, right now I'm still able to soften it by applying a semi-transparent layer on top of the eyebrow, creating a tiny little gradation, and that still allows me to give the appearance of a soft edge. Now if the paint was still wet, I could jostle the brow ridge into the dark of the eyebrow, and by pushing those two together, it would create that gradation, giving the illusion of a soft edge. Let's see, I'm going to go a little bit darker in the mouth. And that 15 hours includes the time that I spent drawing out the portraits, which was probably a full day, and composing it, changing the position of the easel and the chair, and honestly figuring out how to crop it, because composition is the most important thing. I think it's the most advanced thing to to learn, but it's the most important thing when it comes to the success of your picture. And sometimes I'll even cut my canvas after. Right now I'm working on a Centurion Deluxe oil primed linen canvas that you can get off of Jerry's Artorama, and you can cut them with a box cutter, which is really nice. I use a mat board cutter to kind of line it up, and then I use a box cutter to slice it if I need to. Now, I wanted the texture of the canvas to kind of to not be the weave of the canvas. I wanted to apply a layer on top of that. So what I did is I took lead white and I applied it pretty with a reasonable thickness using a palette knife over the entire surface, and that allowed me to create kind of the smoother texture. You can still kind of see the canvas weave through it a little bit, but it's significantly smoother than how they actually come, which is how I like it. And then I waited for that to dry for a very long time. Yeah, I'd highly recommend combining liquid and stand oil together. It gives a very interesting effect. And I store it in a container like this, and sometimes the lid kind of gets clogged, but as long as you keep this shut, then you're pretty much set. I just got this at the dollar store. I think it's used for condiments. Okay, so this is pretty interesting. There's a big ridge on the thumb right here, and I don't really like that. So let me grab a knife and I can show you guys how I scrape it off. Let's zoom in, get you a closer look. Alright, so got this knife. There are a few ways you can use it, but I'm just gonna make sure you guys can see. Yeah, you can. Removing just a little bit of paint, the highest ridge. I want that to go away, just smoothing it out. So there's a healthy balance between having thick, interesting texture in your flesh and making it smooth in the areas that need to be smooth. And that's been the biggest experimentation that I've had in this picture. I really love the work of Will St. John, and all my buddies do too, and we've all been geeking out over it. So go look at his flesh texture. Don't compare mine to his, but go look at that, the master. And then you can go to the extreme. I also appreciate Antonio Mancini. His texture is much more overwhelming. I couldn't paint like that, but I appreciate it. Oops. So this is how it goes. You go through and just scratch away bit by bit. Texture is just one way of making the picture more interesting, making lights more vibrant. As you can see, all of the lights have texture, but my shadows are nice and thin, super, super smooth. This texture creates glare, so that can be useful to make lights feel brighter, but if it's in your shadows, then you're in trouble. Now I can also take the knife and scratch into the hair, making much finer marks. So there's a hierarchy of complexity. I want her portrait to be the most complex thing in this picture, and then everything around it becomes less and less complicated and important. She is the focal point. So everything needs to support her. If you want to learn how to use Liquin, I have a video on the quantity to mix in your paint and just tips for it. So you can look up how to use Liquin, Tanner Steed. Any X-Acto knife would work for this. And that brand, X-Acto, they've got many different shapes. This one is more rounded, and you can also get, you know, more of a spear shape or whatever. So whatever colors you have underneath, when you scratch in, you can reveal, you know, layers of depth. So you may have a white layer and then a brown layer and then a red layer and whatever. So you can be very, very careful and remove just a few layers to reveal whatever you would like by pushing lighter or harder. Of course, you don't want to push too hard because then you'll cut into the canvas. I haven't done that yet, and I'll keep crossing my fingers that I don't do it, ever. If you want a really good example of using a nail or a knife to create hair textures, you can look up Daniel Sprick. I've seen him use nails more than knives to do this exact same thing. If you look up his bearded portrait, all the tiny little hairs in there were described using a nail, scratching back to the white surface. And I think it's a very common practice. It isn't something that is unique to him. Oh, that's a little bit too bright. So I can glaze this area here. Sometimes you pull a little bit too much. You can also use this to create texture in wood, creating physical ridges of the paint so that you can paint in the cracks. This is working out well with his hair too. Not sure if you guys can see that. Oh, you're a little low. Let me raise you. After this, I'll be teaching my Zoom lesson, or it's actually over Google Meets. From 1 to 4, I do it every Friday. So if you're ever interested in joining that, you can email me, or you can go on my website for more information. That's tannersteedart.com. And I have availability for a couple people to join that session. I don't like the class sizes to get too big, but it is open if anyone's interested. And we work on every subject matter. Today we're going to be working on flowers, which I'm thrilled about. I posted recently on my Instagram one of my floral demos that I did at the Art Students League. My Instagram is TannerSteedArt. It's also connected with Facebook if you don't have Instagram. Yeah, this is working very well with the braids. Many of these paintings are going to be on display at the Broadmoor in Colorado Springs. If you guys are in the area in July, I think the first weekend and the last weekend of July, I'll be painting up there in what's called the Broadmoor Art Experience. So I have 3 paintings going with this theme of these 2 little kids. Three in the series so far, but I will likely be making more. My initial inspiration for these was Antonio Mancini's portraits of kids. I think those are just so freaking cool. Kind of melancholic. And the kids look a little bit uneasy, and I like that. I think it's interesting. In Mancini's work. All right, so it's been a little over an hour. I'm going to end it here. So if you guys have any follow-up questions, please ask them in the comment section and in the chat. I'm always responding. And if you want more personalized critiques or any special videos or access to special videos, you can go to my Patreon. It's just Tanner Steed. And I've been releasing weekly videos on different subjects, flowers, portraits, etc.